Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to meet you, Rory.
So, do you want to just start off and just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and how you got into filmmaking?
Yeah, so I'm Sam Riley. I'm an automotive filmmaker. Probably 95 to 99% of my work is cars and cars only, which is great. Although it's nice to do other things every now and again. I come from a place called Preston in Lancashire, which is the county in the UK, in England. So I grew up in Preston and moved away from there when I was about 24 years old. And then I haven't really been back since. I've just been back to see family and things, but I've kind of lived all over the place. And now I live in kind of the centre of the UK, in a little village called Olney, which is not far from Milton Keynes, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but it is. We are in and around the automotive industry here, so all the Formula One teams are around here, the Volkswagen Group's around here, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and Land Rover aren't far away, JLR, sorry, and McLaren's not too far away. Basically, all the British manufacturers, most of them, are not too far from this area, so it's kind of a very central hub to work for car manufacturers. Yeah.
So, did you grow up around cars when you were younger?
Traditionally, I would say no, not really. Like my dad wasn't a car guy at all. I mean, he had like shitty little cars, to be honest with you, but no, not necessarily. But I do remember like being a kid. A lot of the kids on our street, we would hang around and watch the cars go by and see if we could name them and who could guess the name of the car first and things like that. But not traditionally in that sense. But I did love computer games and I did love car computer games. So that was like a big draw for me. Anything to do with like car racing games, like on Nintendo or Sega or anything like that, they were always good fun.
Do you have any like specific car games that you remember playing?
I loved Outrun, like everybody, I think, of my age did. I loved Road Rash, which was on the motorbikes where you used to punch people. I also loved... my favourite car when I was a kid was the Jaguar XJ220. That was my poster car. And I just loved that car. Since I have driven it for about 2 minutes in a car park, but still, I can say I've driven it. But they made a game, a Jaguar XJ220 game, and for some reason I just used to love that game. And now probably if I played it, I would realise it's absolutely rubbish. But I remember being a kid and playing that game and having that poster on my wall. That was kind of, yeah, it was good. It was good.
And do you still play games?
No, I don't. I don't really play games anymore. I was really, really into it when I was a kid, like really into playing computer games, and then all of a sudden, it got to a stage where I don't know, things just changed. I kind of grew out of that phase, and I don't. I mean, I do have like an Xbox and stuff, but I hardly ever play anymore. Yeah.
It's hard to get the time, especially when you're doing filming all the time. And do you do editing yourself?
Yes. Yeah, I do editing myself.
The editing takes up a lot of time.
It does. Which I do think is a really good thing about our job, because when you're out on the road, when you're getting sick of being out on the road and you're shooting, and it's just you're away from home and all the fun starts to come away and from the actual shoots itself. By the time you're ready for a bit of a break, then you've got to go and sit on an edit suite. And then when you're in the edit suite and it's sunny outside and you're starting to get a bit agitated because you want to be out shooting, then you can go back into the shooting world. So I feel like that's quite a good thing about our job, or certainly people who shoot and edit, is that you get like almost two different jobs in one. And the lifestyle with both jobs is completely different. As you probably know, editing is, you're completely on your own, and you're on your own time. That's the other important thing. I always think a certain time of day you work better with an edit. And if you want to wake up and do what you want in the morning and do some normal life stuff, you can do, and then work all the way through into the early hours. That's up to you. But obviously on a shoot, on a set, it doesn't work like that. You're very much restricted to the times that somebody else has dictated.
Yeah, and I think when you're editing, you're able to kind of learn. Like you can see, oh, what did I film, and maybe I can get the next shot next time. Like whereas if you weren't like involved in the edit, you probably wouldn't learn as fast. I think unless you were getting that feedback or constantly watching it. So early on, like when you first started, would you kind of film something and then take it to the editing room and then kind of play around and then kind of learn from there?
Yeah, I went to uni and studied television production, and by far my favourite part of, like, my favourite module at university was the editing. I always thought the editing was the most, and it sounds weird, but the most creative bit, because that is the bit where all the pieces come together, isn't it? So it was the editing that kind of got me even before film. I was always shooting, but maybe when I started out, I wasn't that great at it. I didn't know my composition properly, and I didn't know what made things right. But I think being kind of like trying to get good at being an editor certainly made me become a much better shooter. And I still, to this day, I love to edit. I love to edit, even though it's just so bloody time consuming. I do love to do it.
And you mentioned you're inspired by like video games. Was there any like films or TV shows that you watched that was also inspiring?
So when I started doing cars in 2010, I got a job working for a publishing company, and this was at the time when I think the iPads had just come out, or they hadn't been out long, and the publishing company were making like digital versions of magazines to go on the iPad. And they, obviously, it wasn't just to look at something on the iPad. It was just, you couldn't just read it. They needed something interactive. So they were creating little kind of like animations and things. But they really wanted to, the publishing company that I was working for really wanted to hit hard video. And this was kind of, I suppose, the time that YouTube was turning from cats climbing up fridges to, let's actually make some proper content now. At the time, when I was working for that publishing company, I started filming cars for car magazines, and it was like little online reviews and kind of like drag races and all that kind of stuff. But this was absolutely in its infancy, and at the time I felt like there was no real inspiration apart from Top Gear. I was just Top Gear crazy, absolutely mad about Top Gear. I loved the ideas, the way they did things. I loved the style. The way they shot things was so unique. You'd never seen that before. The way that they told the story was so unique. And I just used to watch loads of Top Gear and use that. That was I thought, if I could make this crappy little YouTube/iPad video in the same style as Top Gear, pretty much on my own, or like me and one other person, then I've done my job. So it was mainly Top Gear, but then I loved car chases in films, Ronin and even the Bourne films and An Italian Job and all that kind of stuff. I was always a big fan I loved a car chase in a film, but really Top Gear was the one. Top Gear, and now you can get inspiration from loads of places, but at the time it felt like Top Gear was the place to get inspired from.
Yeah, Top Gear's like, especially in the UK, I guess were you close to like where they filmed and stuff, or you kind of knew certain locations? You're like near those areas?
Yeah. I mean, I know the UK is not a very big place, is it? But we shot on similar locations. So we used to shoot on there's a film set in the UK where they've shot everything. They've done all the Batman films there. They did all the Star Wars films there. It's a very famous spot. You see it in loads of stuff. And I know Top Gear had used it before, and we used to go there I don't even think you can go there anymore, because I think the big productions basically buy it out now, so you can't even use it. But you used to, if you're a Star Wars fan, if you used to type Millennium Falcon into Google Maps, it would come up with the location, because Millennium Falcon was sat there for like 5 years, the actual Millennium Falcon. So we used to go to that place, which was great to shoot stuff, and you'd see other productions. But when I was working for this publishing company, we decided to do a kind of a story where if you remember, Top Gear were doing a whole thing about the greatest roads in the world to drive, and they did like Stelvio Pass, and then they ended up at the Transfiguration in Romania, which is what they claimed was the best road in the world. So we were I was working for Evo magazine, and creating their online videos. And we decided to make a series that was kind of led on from what Top Gear were doing, and we decided to find like the real best driving road in the world. And we made this series, and we started traveling around, and we went to Romania and went to that Transfiguration road, and we went to Norway, and we went to Mallorca, and went all around trying to find the best driving road in the world.
Cool. Yeah, so that sounds like a good concept. So going back to like the early days, like how did you get to like the magazine job? Was there like an earlier time where you kind of just started filming cars and like doing it as a hobby or for friends or other clients? Like how did you build your way up to working for the magazine?
After university, I wanted to go traveling, like as a lot of young people do. I did it before university as well. I spent a year in Australia when I was 18, 19, kind of got the bug for it, came back, did this television production course, and then I was like, I need to do it again. So I had a little production company that I sat with a few friends after uni, and we did some jobs together, and things were going well. And one of the guys said he wanted to move to London, because I was still living up in the northwest. He said he wanted to move to London, so he said, come with me. And I said, I want to go traveling again. So I went off and spent 2 years traveling around America, Canada, and Hawaii, Fiji. Did New Zealand, and actually got a job in New Zealand working for a TV company. Very, very lucky. Got this job working for the TV company, and I was just editing. And I met some amazing people that I still work with today from that job. I was 24 years old when I arrived. And then when I got home, I called up that one guy that I knew who'd moved to London and said, look, you're the only person I know in the industry. I was getting to know people in New Zealand, but I don't know anyone in the industry here. And he said he was doing this magazine thing, this iPad thing. And he kind of got me an interview, and then it kind of went from there, really. So, and I still work with this guy today. He's a freelancer like me. He's a car filmmaker like me. So basically just watching what they were doing with these reviews, I kind of just... I'd started at the publishing company before I even really knew how to shoot a car, in all honesty. But the project they gave me was it was a very basic project to begin with. So do you know Car Wow by any chance? Matt Watson.
Yeah.
So I started out with him. So they just come up with this idea for what turned into Car Wow. But at the time it was called Car Buyer, and it was basic reviews, basic car reviews. So none of the cool shit. It was all the basic cars, the boring cars that the mums bought and basically normal people buy. Most people thought it wasn't going to work, and it worked unbelievably well. And it only really dawned on me when I was with a girlfriend, and her mum said to me, "Oh, Sam, you know about cars. I was thinking about getting this, whatever it was, like this Mini or something. I can't even remember what it was. What do you think?" And I was like, I don't really know much about like normal basic cars. I said, let's type it in YouTube. And the first thing that came up was a video I'd made with Matt Watson. So I was like, damn, this really works actually. for basic car reviews for normal people who aren't even car people and they want to just see a comparison between different cars. So I did the first 100 videos of that. It was called Car Buyer at the time. This is 2010. And then doing that 4 reviews a week I was doing. So shooting these 4 reviews a week, and there was no one there with me. It was just me and Matt Watson. That was it. So I was learning on the job. And because they were basic car reviews, that you didn't need to be arty or anything like that. They were just, you almost had to stick to the structure, and then anything outside of that was a bonus. If you could get a cool tracking shot or you could get a nice pan or whatever, it would be a bonus. So over time, I just kind of started honing this skill really, and then every now and again I would get invited to do like a let's call it a cool film for the magazines that Dennis Publishing owned, where they had Auto Express. So I'd do it the odd one for them, and then eventually that led on to Evo. And Evo at the time were very much in their infancy of YouTube. They had Chris Harris on board, who's obviously quite famous in our industry, but he wasn't at the time. So I finished with the Matt Watson stuff and then went on to Evo to work with Chris Harris and a bunch of people that I still now call friends that are all kind of legends in this industry. So Chris Harris, Henry Catchpole, and Dickie Meaden, Jethro Bovingdon, Harry Metcalf. These are all people who've really done well in the video game since then. So that was just like the best school for filming cars ever. And it was like when I left the Matt Watson thing and started doing the Evo stuff, I went from boring Kias and, Nissans to basically supercars, Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all that jazz. And so it was just heaven to take these fairly mediocre skills at the time and then be, sent on a Bugatti Veyron super sport shoot or something. And I used to just show up me and a camera, and I had a GoPro Hero 1. This is talking about 2011. I'd have like one GoPro with a suction cup. I had a Z1 HDV tape cam. Maybe I didn't at that point. I might have had something, an EX3 or an EX1 or something. But yeah, I'd show up with like one camera. Sometimes wouldn't even take a tripod, just a camera and a GoPro, and then it was like, right, you've got to make a cool film. So that was the best school I could have ever for filming cars.
How would you do your shoots? Do you want to just explain kind of like the format? Like you'd turn up and he would talk about the car. Would you do any driving shots?
Basically, when I got to Evo, the way that we would do a shoot was, at the time, stills or the magazine was the king, and the video was a bonus. So I was employed to pretty much shoot behind a photographer. Like they were unbelievable. That it was all about the still shoot, and the journalists were there to write a story. The photographer was there to get a published picture in a magazine or the front cover, which is obviously the major thing to get. But I was there to pretty much like do what you can in the background. That's how it started. Obviously now it's completely the opposite. Like if I go on a shoot with stills, they're the ones in the background. Sorry to the photographers out there. But at the time it was all about the photography. So that was another really great place to learn, because especially for things like composition, because I was watching these photographers and the way they would set up static shots, the way that they would do panning shots, cornering shots, alt-ons, some crazy rigs that they build and things. And I would class these people just as much legends as I do all those journalists that I mentioned. So it was a proper thrown in at the deep end. But yeah, on a shoot, it would be really dealing with the journalist and hoping that the journalist was up for doing something cool. And obviously, some journalists have egos, so they want to make the video look good because they want to make themselves look good. But it would be dealing with them working out how much time we had between the still shoot and then ticking off like a list of what you absolutely bare basic need. So we'd have to do an interior piece to camera. Actually, when I very first started doing this, I didn't even have GoPros. I used to just hold a big, massive camera like that and just wedge it into the corner of the car. And I'd like wrap a jumper around it and hold it while they presented into their, with a radio mic on going through XLRs. And then that would be one thing you'd have to do, the interior piece to camera, making sure all the audio was good, making sure they were saying the right thing, because you were kind of like directing in a way. I would never really tell a journalist that they were saying the right or wrong thing. There'd usually be a stand-up walk around, like an external PTC, piece to camera, which would be them stood by the car, talking about the car, and maybe doing a walk around and talking about details and what was different. And then it would be a case of doing bolt-ons, which would be like a GoPro, basically, at the time. Or I used to get I bought one of those little, like, tiny Sony Handycam things. And I used to clamp that to the side of cars to get shots of, like, wheels spinning. And I could send you a film where I did that with, like, a crappy little Handycam thing. So we do the bolt-on shots. And then we would... then it would all be about driving shots, so it would just be passing shots and trying to make, because you never had any time. So it'd be like picking 2-3 corners and trying to make it look like 20 corners by shooting at different focal lengths and doing different moves. And this is the era when sliders had just come out. So it was like, if you had time to set your slider up, you could do slider moves, or if not, I'd do all sorts of weird stuff just to try and get shots. And then it made you have to think differently, because you'd be like, I can't just keep doing the same, like, oh, he passed me out this way, he's going to exit me that way. You'd have to really think of different things. And then also in your head, keep a mental note of, I can't shoot too many fronts because it's going to look weird in an edit. You have to make sure you've got enough rears to match the fronts and all that kind of stuff. And this is before drones, so there was no droneage. Yeah, sometimes if you were going to do a kind of drone shot, if you were going to go to somewhere like the Stelvio Pass or somewhere like that, it'd be a case of, right, let's go and climb up that mountain. And then, you'd spend like 20 minutes getting up there just to get one shot, look down on them and just get one shot of a car snaking through a road. But that would be like your basic setup. And like I said, working alongside the photographers, because a lot of inspiration was taken from what they were doing and what they needed to do. What they needed to do was often what you needed to do. And sometimes their focus was exactly what your focus is, and sometimes it wasn't. Like a photographer could spend like 2 hours doing a cover shoot. I'm not saying that they would always do that, but sometimes they could, lining all the cars up perfectly. Say it was a group test between a load of cars, they would line them all up. They'd be waiting for the light, and I would be getting pissed off because I'd be like, I could be using this time to shoot something. But then all the driving shots, they would only need a couple for a story. They needed like 2 pans. They're like, yeah, I've got all my action. And I'd be like, shit, I need like 20 driving shots, otherwise I can't make this film work. So it was always working with the photographers and working with the journalists for us to all create this collective thing. And it made a lot of sense, because I wanted, and I think we all wanted the videos to kind of reflect what the magazine was saying. So reflect, if the story in the magazine looked a certain way, you'd want the video to be almost like the video representation of that story. So like I keep saying, it was the best school you could ever have. And I would say to anyone who's trying to get into it, editorial is king. It's the best learning curve. It really is. And I'm knocking on publishers' doors and publishing companies and just begging to shoot any sort of car content, YouTube channels, and it's just the best way to learn. Yeah. So when I was doing the Matt Watson thing, I was contracted to those 100 films. So I did the first 100 films, and I was getting paid shit money, terrible money. I was using their kit. I didn't have to provide my own kit or anything. But I was living in London, which is expensive, very expensive, and I was on terrible money. But then when that contract ended, because that contract was for like 10 months, I think, to do 100 videos. It was something like that. I can't quite remember. But when it got to the end of the 9-10 months, whatever it was, I was just very lucky that Evo were in a position where they decided that they wanted to actually take this video thing seriously and employ someone. So it was all about timing. I was about to be, maybe lose my freelance position and not be made full time, and then all of a sudden this full time job came up with Evo, and it was part of all under the same umbrella. So it was just perfect timing, really good timing. Editorial really teaches you to be quick, like really quick. It's not like now or like on big film sets, everything takes so much time. Whereas the editorial stuff, you never had any time. So you couldn't afford to wait for the sun to be in the right place. You couldn't afford to drive to this amazing road because you wouldn't have time to get there. You'd have to sometimes just do it where the base was. So and this takes me on to car launches. So that's what I was doing a lot of the time, was going on car launches. So a manufacturer would have a launch, could be anywhere in the world. We'd fly in. You'd usually get a day, and then I'd sometimes even fly back in the same day, but usually stay over, get like a morning or so with the car, and then fly home. And I was on these launches, like sometimes could be up to 2-3 times a week. I'd fly home, go on another one, and come back and forth and back and forth. Mostly Europe, because obviously if you go to the States, you can't just go for a day. I did do once. I once went to the LA Motor Show for one day. Spent more time in the air than I did at the show. But mostly European launches, Spain, France, Portugal, and it was Lamborghini, Ferrari, Maserati, all the big hitters, let's say, in the kind of what I would class as the supercar Evo realm. We were Bentley, McLaren. You'd be going on all these launches and you'd have like no time. So it was heartbreaking to know that you were like, I've got 2 hours to make this work, or maybe less than. But then it felt so good when the whole thing came together. And you were like, we did that in 90 minutes or whatever, and we've actually created a story that works. And I think that was the thing about editorial, how it really teaches you to be quick, and that has really translated very, very well into what I do now. I think it's just the best school. The best school is editorial, 100%.
So you mentioned, like at the start, they were very focused on photos for the magazine, and then what was the shift? Like, is it because magazine sales were going down, and then YouTube or their website videos were going up, and then they decided to put more focus on video? Like, how was that? When did that happen?
Well, the publishing company that I was working for, they actually we had a partnership with Google. I think a lot of big hitters, people who actually started to do decent numbers online, editorially, we used to have like a partnerships manager, and we'd actually go for meetings at Google and YouTube. This is still in the time though when people weren't really making money out of YouTube. That they were pushing it, and YouTube were helping us, algorithms and all that stuff, but you still weren't making money. I don't even think, even when things were going really well at Evo and we were getting big-ish numbers, I don't even think it covered my wage, what YouTube paid at that point. But I think the publishing company, maybe too late, but they realized that they could open up a brand like Evo to America, for example, where you can get Evo, but it's hard to come by, that magazine. So they could open up the brand to anywhere in the world, because that was the thing about YouTube. You can watch it from anywhere. So it was real brand building identity, which can only be a good thing, really. But you're right. There was a decline in sales of magazines, and it's gone lower and lower. I'm not fully against that, because I think what it means is you've sifted off a lot of crap stuff and you end up with real quality magazines, which we do have now. There's some like beautiful car magazines out there. But it was very evident that YouTube was turning, like I said earlier, YouTube was turning into, less silly videos and more a serious thing. And I was there for 6 years at Evo, and you could see the change, and the change in quality. YouTube was terrible quality, and then it all of a sudden was just getting better and better and better, and there was more people competing. But it was a pretty special time. It was a pretty special time.
So you mentioned you'd have sometimes like 2 hours to film. Like, what was kind of like the general hours that you would film, and then would you go back and edit? And then how long would you have to edit and before you had to like post?
So that was really all that stuff was based on embargoes. So say we were on like a Lamborghini. I went on the original Aventador launch. Went on the original Huracan launch. Or something like, I'm just thinking of an example here. On something like that, the embargo could be a week later, or it could be the next day at midnight. Sometimes it could be that night. So you'd fly in, maybe stay over, go to a presentation, which us filmmakers and photographers couldn't really be bothered with. But I suppose the journalists had to go and work out what they needed to learn about the car. You'd wake up the next morning, try and get the car as early as possible. If it was a road route, you'd usually sack off the road route, make up your own road route. And the thing about Evo is they're so good at roads. It's been going so long, they know all the journalists know cool roads. So if you're in the location, they'll probably not bother with the road route and go to a place they know works. And then we'll just hammer it as fast as we could, and then get on the plane, and all depending on embargo. It would be just edit it as quick as you can. Sometimes I'd be doing it on the plane on the way home. It was crazy. It was, and that was the thing with the editing as well. It taught you to turn around really quick, really, really quick. Not all jobs were like that. We used to do group tests, and we used to do Car of the Year films, which were bigger, and it had a bit of a longer lead time, because the Car of the Year films would have to wait for the magazine to publish. So that you had a little bit of longer lead time, but every time I was back in the edit suite and I was about to start working on something, they'd have me on another job, flying somewhere to do another job. So it got fairly hectic, to be honest with you. But
Ever got an editor to help out?
I had assistants at points. They could never afford to get me an editor. I had a couple of assistants who were cheap or next to free. And but I was so invested in the editing, I found it quite hard to give that up. I kind of wanted to see the project all the way through. And then we had a central film team, which is the team that I started in when I first started doing the Matt Watson stuff. So every now and again, I could beg to use one of their camera ops to come and help me on a shoot. And I met some amazing people who I still work with today through that. So I would, if it was a big shoot, like a big group test or something, mainly if it was happening in the UK, so they didn't have to fly anyone anywhere, then I would usually try and beg for someone to come and help me as a second camera operator. But it was fun times. It was good.
So what does embargo mean?
So the embargo is when the manufacturer dictates when all of the spoken driving impressions can be released. So a magazine cannot publish before embargo, because you would be reviewing the car before anyone else has. So to make it a fair playing field, they have a specific time, a specific date, and it's usually like, it'll be to GMT or something like that, that everyone has to stick to that time. And if you publish beforehand, I've heard stories, you can be fined or you can be blacklisted. But once it hits midnight, usually midnight is often an embargo time, then everyone can publish their videos at the same time. So, like a big example for that is someone like Ferrari. Like I did the LaFerrari launch, which was a big one, and like I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I had like less than 24 hours to turn that around, and I was like still working on it all the way up to the midnight thing, and you'd stay up and then publish, and obviously midnight in the UK is, middle of the day for you guys, so it was important embargo, and you'd like to think that somewhere in the world there were people online watching it.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. So that's good. So it's basically like a launch day is where they invite all the press, and then you get like 1 hour slots or 2 hour slots with the car, and that you have to kind of hand it off to the next guy, and then they film it. Like, is that how it works?
Yes and no. I mean, a lot of the time on launches that you will get, journalists would share a car, but if you were doing like stills and video, they might give you your own car just for your journalist. You wouldn't have to hand that over to another journalist, but sometimes you would actually, but a lot of the time you would have that car for the day. But the day would never be a full day because you'd always have to fly home that evening. So they'd be rushing you to get to the airport. So you'd get the car in the morning, you'd like go off, find a road, you'd start filming, and you'd be getting phone calls off the PR saying, you transferred to the airport, you need to be back, you need to bring the car back, you need to... So it was always hectic like that. It was crazy. It's crazy busy, but yeah, it taught me and other people that I did and photographers the best use of time, I think. The best use of time when it came to filming.
Yeah, so like during those launches, are there any like memorable cars that you've filmed that you remember?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I suppose a lot of people who work in publishing think that their era is the golden era, but it's certainly, I think I came in at a really, really good time. So I got to do the trilogy, the hybrid hypercar trilogy. So I did the P1 launch and Porsche 918 and LaFerrari, all individual launches. I went on the original Aventador, original Huracan, Lexus LFA. I did all the Ferraris, the 488, 458, the F12. Basically anything that came out between 2010 and 2016, I pretty much went on the launch. Any big supercar, we were on that launch. And that is some very cool metal. I mean, some of the coolest stuff. That a lot was happening in the car world in that era. Bugatti Veyron. Did a few Veyrons actually. Also went on a couple of events where they were doing the high-speed runs, trying to break the world's land speed record. Hennessy did some stuff with them. And Pagani, the Wire had just come out. We were at the end of the Zonda. In fact, Harry, my boss, who's now a YouTuber, he had a Zonda, and then we went and did the Wire launch. So it was just just spectacularly amazing cars, just incredible. A dream to film.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's a good, yeah, definitely a lineup of those years of the cars that came out. Do you know Al Clark?
I do. Yeah, I know Al. Yeah, in fact, I've not spoke to him for a long time, but I know him. We basically when I started doing this, there was like 3 people who did this job in the UK anyway, and there was me, Al Clark, and a guy called Dave Hale. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, is he the car filmmaker, Dave?
That's the one.
Hale? Yeah, I just did one with Al Clark because his story is like yours, like Car Magazine.
Very similar.
And then competing with the photos, and then it switched, and it's like the photos are attached onto your shoot now. So that's why it's interesting to see like the switch and like when exactly that happened. I guess it was like slow evolution of time, or did it one day they just said, all right, we're doing video 100%?
I think it was slow. Yeah, I think it just one day it just seemed, I can't even really remember, but stills was always the big thing, and then all of a sudden it just I can't remember, but it did flip. It definitely flipped, and it wasn't a big flip. It was a very slow flip, but it did flip at some point.
And then in terms of like equipment, were you like, was it up to you to buy all your own stuff, or was there one time where they're like, we want to spend more on certain gear, or like, how did that go?
So to begin with, they were unbelievably stingy when it came to buying equipment. Like I said, it was me and a GoPro, and I'd have one big Sony camera, and that would be pretty much it. And then over time, I started to try and get more out of them, and tried to get a bigger budget each year. I think I had a budget once a year to buy a kit, and it was always a minuscule amount. But I eventually started building up a bit of a decent amount of kit, including, like, I remember getting the first Ronin from DJI and things like that, jibs and sliders, and actually getting more than one GoPro, all those things. And then obviously they paid for all my equipment until I left Evo in 2016, and then I had to go into the big bad world and buy it all myself. So that was a bit of a shock, but by far the best decision I've ever made, ever.
So do you know what kind of equipment you've used throughout your career and like up until today? Like, I'm sure there's been a bunch of different cameras, but if you remember, like what there were.
Yeah, so I've been Sony since I bought my first Sony camera. It was a Z1, which was this is the FX9. It's this kind of size, or this kind of this kind of size of camera, but it was HDV tape, and it was a professional camcorder. That's what it was, and it had XLR inputs and all that. And then I've pretty much had every single one since then. I bought that in 2005 when I'd finished uni. I hadn't even finished uni at that point. I was still at uni. I bought this this Z1 with a friend, and then we paid that off. I can't even remember how much it was now. And then since then, whether it's through the publishing company or myself, I've had pretty much every Sony, and I've always stuck with the big cameras. I did adopt the SLRs like everybody did, but I always made sure I still had a big camera, because for shooting action, it was always the best thing to use, always the best thing to use. And then I wanted XLR inputs, and I wanted ND filters and all that stuff. So I stayed Sony all the way through. I had a Z1, and then I think I had a Z5, Z7, EX1, EX3, and then you're talking PMW 200, and then I think after that it was FS 700, FS7, FX9, and then I want a Venice.
That's the next one, the Venice.
Well, I've used one before, and I've used Alexas and I've used Reds before on shoots when needed, when we need to get those in. But the FX9 just suits, like the day-to-day stuff is so bloody good for it. I would love to I'm waiting for Sony to make something that sits between the FX9 and the Venice, and I'm sure it's got to be in the works, because that camera just does everything I need it to do. But I'd like a few extra things. I'd like RAW, and I would like that has a 6K sensor, but you don't get to use the full 6K. It's downsampled to 4, so 6K sensor, RAW, and few improvements in the color science, but apart from that, it's a really good camera.
You use like the big camera, but then you'll have the smaller cameras to like act as GoPros, or do you have a second shooter?
Yeah, so now most of the shoots I do, well, all of my I don't do any editorial now. None of it's editorial. It's all manufacture work, and most of the time I have a crew, but it's always a small crew. We've always been like that. I've done the big shoots with the big crews before. 100, 150 people, 200 people. I don't like it at all. I feel like you're a tiny cog in a massive wheel. Whereas the independent stuff that we do, I never have more than 5. It's probably the maximum, 5 or 6 people. And then I would direct and shoot at the same time. A lot of the shoots I do is just 3 people. And then studio based, which is coming up for nearly 50% of what I do these days, is studio. And I love studio. Is usually me and an assistant. That's it.
And then how do you, like, going back to the, like, how do you film the car driving shots? Are you like in a van doing handheld, or do you have like a car rig that you get those shots with?
Yeah, I mean, actually, similar to Al Clark, we do the whole Inspire 2 rig to a car and do tracking shots that way. If it is for, let's call it the low budget stuff. If it's the bigger budget stuff, we can always get in Ukraine or whatever we need to. The problem with Ukraine's Russian arms, everything needs planning, and everything takes a lot of time. And sometimes we just don't have that luxury of time. So we often stick with the whole Inspire attached to a car, especially on track when it's super smooth. You can get some amazing shots. I actually think you can get better shots than you can with a Ukraine, because you can bolt the Inspire inches from the ground, whereas a big tracking arm, boom arm, you can't really get that low. It's just too dangerous. So, and then yeah, every now and again, if we have to, I'll jump in the boot and get on the gimbal. But that's less and less these days.
And who thought of the Inspire 2 bolting it onto the car first?
Yeah, that's a good one. I bet you asked Al that question, didn't you?
Well, he said he's the first one, he claims, but he's not sure.
To be fair, he was the first person I saw do it, but I did. I have seen other people do it in different countries and things like that. But Al was the first person I saw do it. I remember doing a McLaren shoot, and I saw him doing it, and I was like, oh, that's quite a cool idea, actually. But a lot of people do it since. So yeah, I've got to give Al the credit for that one.
He said he crashed his drone, and then he was like, what am I going to do with it? And then he was like, oh, I might as well bolt it on, because the camera still works.
Yeah.
So it's a happy accident, I guess.
Definitely a happy accident. I'm just waiting for DJI to make something where you don't have to attach the whole drone, and it's just the camera and the controls. Like, they're almost there with the 4D, but it's not quite right. So I think I'm praying, I've got faith in DJI that they will come out with something like that.
Yeah, that's like the Inspire 3 is like 8K and everything now, so they could just use that system and just put it into a small box that you could just mount on anywhere.
Exactly. I'm fingers crossed that's what they're going to do. Hopefully, because that would just make things so much easier. Because the other thing about that I mean, everyone calls it the dead duck, and that could be from Al. He might have come up with that, I'm not sure. But the good thing about the dead duck is you can go really, really quick. Whereas, once again, with a Russian arm or a Ukraine, you can go fast, but you can't get as close maybe with those to the car at those kind of speeds. Whereas with this, you could be like sat on the bumper and flying everywhere, and it just looks cool. So,
well, that's what Al was saying about his Bugatti shot. You know, like nobody knew how he got it, but then he just got another Bugatti, and it was like, oh, okay, that's how he did it. But yeah, so that's awesome. Talking about drones, do you fly drones yourself, and did you start with like a lower level and build your way up to different? Like, how was that? Yeah,
I fly drones as well. I started on like a Phantom 3, I think it was, or something like that. Phantom, whichever was the first one that they put their own camera on. It wasn't just a GoPro. It was the Phantom 3. And then did a lot of crashing to begin with. And Phantom 4s and crashed them, and then got the Mavic and just fell in love with the Mavic. and then I've had every Mavic since. I had Inspire 1, but I never used it because I was always flying the Mavic. And I've not gone into the FPV thing because I use guys that are so good at FPV that I just think there's no point me. I mean, I still think I might go down that route, but the guys I use are so bloody good that it's best just to employ them to do the job. And then I can sit back and direct, and they give me the monitor, and we can plan the shot and go through it together. But I'm never saying never. I think I'm still up for giving it a little bit of a go. I just can't see me having the time to be soldering circuit boards and things like that. But yeah, I might get into it.
You have to start with like the video game style one where you have to practice. I'm sure there's a lot of hours that you have to spend like learning how it all works as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm I'm very confident with the Mavic. I fly it in sport mode all the time without any of the I turn off all the obstacle avoidance because I just want to fly it. I want to fly it like an FPV, and I'm very confident at flying that fast and getting very close to cars. But obviously the FPV thing is a different game altogether. And I've got to give credit to the people who are really, really good at it.
You started working for the magazines, and you were kind of a one-man band, and so you were forced to kind of learn all the different roles, whereas if you become a film director, normally you're just directing, but because you've grown up doing every different role, you probably become an expert in everything you need to do, and you've found that working with the bigger kind of productions, you'd rather like take on a lot of the roles yourself. Like, how has that progressed over time?
Because I like to say that me and my peers and all the people that are who started at the similar time to me, we are the YouTube generation, really. Where when I was at uni, you were taught that if you were a vision mixer or you were a camera operator or you were an editor, you stuck with that job and your career trajectory would go from there, and then you'll follow into the industry as a vision mixer, as a camera operator, a jib crane operator, whatever it would be. Whereas when we started doing this whole YouTube, these YouTube films, it was always a tiny crew. So you had to do everything. You had to be good at sound. You had to be good at camera opping. You had to be good at editing. You had to be good at pretty much everything. You had to be good at everything. And that, I think I am the start of that generation. Me and my peers are the start of that generation. And then those skills have been then transferred away from the editorial stuff and into the manufacture stuff. And a lot of car manufacturers probably used to spend millions on like one car advert a year. That would be their marketing budget. And now they know they can take that, whatever their big bulk of cash is, and spread it so thin because they can have one guy or two guys or three guys or, a tiny, tiny crew doing a much cheaper film, but it still has their quality because we're all transferable with our skills. And I consider myself extremely lucky to be in that YouTube generation. What we do, my production company, Run and Gun Media, we create all sorts of adverts for car manufacturers, from the tiniest of tiny things all the way up to the big marketing stuff and everything in between. And I think there's a lot of people coming through now who have those skills, who can do that, do the work, do the bottom of the barrel stuff, which is also very important. It could be dealing with journalists who just need a piece to camera, something as simple as that. Yesterday I was at McLaren and I was doing like, somebody was speccing a 750S and I was just filming this guy spec his 750. Very, very basic shoot, just following him around, handheld, microphones, very simple. And then you could do that all the way up to huge Rolls-Royce advert or something like that.
so you finished working for the magazine like Evo, and then you went off and you started your own production company, or you became freelance. Like, how did you find work from there?
I feel like I've been at the start of lots of things that have either gone nowhere or kind of gone somewhere. But I was very lucky that when I left Evo, Drive Tribe, if you've heard of that, had just started. So Drive Tribe was about to start, and there's a few of us that were at Evo that moved over. I was ready to go freelance anyway. So I went over to Drive Tribe, but I wanted to be freelance. I didn't want to be staff. So I got on a contract for, I can't remember what it was now, 6-8 days a month. I think it was like 6 days a month or something like that, to produce content for them. And then those days could be shooting or editing. So it probably worked out for like two, 3 films a month or something like that. So that was my first probably 9-10 months of being freelance was working for Drive Tribe and then trying to get other jobs in between on the side. And then it got to a stage where things just absolutely flew, and the work just kept piling in. All manufacturers just were going down the video route. It was all about timing. Very, very lucky with the timing. And I was actually getting more work than was justifying me having the retainer for Drive Tribe. And I was like almost ready to give up the retainer. And then there was a mass exodus from Drive Tribe, and they got rid of everyone at that point, which was, for me, it wasn't the worst thing in the world because I was desperate to go freelance. And my time at Evo with editorial I was going on all these launches and meeting these PRs, these really interesting people, getting on with them really well, socializing with them, going for drinks in the evening, sitting with them at dinner, blah, blah, blah. And that was a great opportunity to then go to these PRs and say, oh, by the way, I'm freelance. If you need any video shooting. And I just kind of made my way around all the manufacturers that I knew. And probably the first ones to really take me up were Aston Martin. And I still work for them now. They're probably by far the majority of what I do, and they've been so good to me. And I've moved between different departments and started out on the little things and gone to the really big things now, which has been incredible. And also, it's the thing about living in the UK is the car manufacturers of the UK, the ones that their central office is UK, will often employ UK-based filmmakers. So thankfully, I've been very lucky that I've now worked for Bentley, Rolls-Royce, McLaren, Aston, all the British manufacturers. And I would say, if I was going to hand any advice, it would be the same for if there's any of you people who are trying to get into the industry. Your best option is to go with the manufacturers that are local to where you live. I suppose it's a bit different in the States because you don't have to worry too much about being able to speak German, French, or Portuguese or Spanish, but well, maybe Spanish. But yeah, so my production company works for all these different manufacturers that are usually predominantly UK based.
How does it work? Like you mentioned, the PR guys, like, do they work for a marketing company, or they work directly for the manufacturer and then they hire people and you get paid from the manufacturer?
Yeah, the PRs work directly for the manufacturer. So I was lucky enough to get in, like the Aston, for example, I was lucky enough to get involved with one of the PRs. I'd done some shoots, been on some shoots with him, and then kind of hit this guy up, and then next thing you know, I was invited to do a couple of shoots, little things, just shooting B-roll, basic B-roll that packages, and then it just led on to bigger and bigger things. But the PR and marketing are separate divisions, and the PR led into the marketing. And it was the same with McLaren, the same with Bentley, and so on and so forth.
So what's the deal with the manufacturers? Do you create them content and they put it on their YouTube or TV or like, and then are you allowed to use it yourself for your own website or to promote your own company?
The way I've worked with manufacturers in the past is they will allow you to, once they've published the film, obviously you could never publish it before they do. That would be a big no-no. But yes, then you can use it to help promote yourself because, I mean, you've worked on that project and sometimes you've seen it through from its absolute inception through to the finished article. And then when the car gets unveiled, a lot of the time that's what we're doing, was we're producing content for a new car that's about to get unveiled. And they might show it at Pebble Beach or Goodwood or a motor show, and our film will get played on the big screen. And then once that's done, then you can use it to help promote what you've been doing. Yeah. You're absolutely right. But if I was going to do something like reuse that footage for a documentary, I would do it with Aston. So like, for example, the Valhalla, my production company have been following that project since its inception, since pretty much the first sketch. So we've been following that project for like 6 years now. And we're doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff that isn't shown publicly. Lots and lots of stuff that is shot and then shown to the customers. They have their own portal. So there's a lot of films we make that never get seen. You know, and we've done for manufacturers, you know, like for McLaren, we did all the Senna GTRs and stuff. That it was all a lot of films that never get seen publicly because they're made specifically for the customers. And the same with Valhalla. We've been following that journey for so long that we've kind of got a collection of all this stuff. And hopefully at the end, I can go to Aston and say, look, we've shot all this stuff for years and years. We've got to make a documentary. But it would have to be on their terms, I think.
So if there was a Valhalla like documentary, like how would you go about it? You just like send an email, call the guy up, or you just mention to the PR company or the PR guy, like how about we do a documentary? Like how do you go about like pitching ideas to these manufacturers?
To be honest with you, a lot of the time the manufacturers come to us with a very basic idea, and then we mold that idea into something visual. So a lot of the time, if you're working with a creative marketing person, you can come together and actually come up with a great idea between you. Or sometimes I get a phone call and they say, like, I'm shooting a car in the studio next week, can't tell you what, and you know, I spoke to someone today and they were like, what can we do that's different from what we did last time? So then you're like trying to come up with ideas. You're always trying to outdo yourself, aren't you, with the next project? So sometimes it is as broad as that. What can we do that's different from last time? And then you can take inspiration from other films and think, oh, Porsche did this. I'd love to take a bit of that and then bring that into this. And a lot of it is stealing ideas, but just making them your own. And the manufacturers that I work with, unless it's going through a big agency, when they're paying the agency for a big idea, they're often coming to me with a tiny idea and then letting us, you know, mold that idea into something. And then often we might pitch that back to them. It's taking their idea and just turning it into something really cool and visual. They might like it, they might hate it, but you will work like that until you've decided on something that actually, you know, visually works. Because we're always thinking about visual. There's not that much with what I do that is really a story. You know, it's never that much of a story, which is a bit of a shame. It's usually how do we make this car look cool, whether it's static or moving.
Cool. And then how do you go about like communicating with the crew or like the driver or the car driver? Like, do you have little Hot Wheels toys that you kind of say, I'm going to drive around here? And then do you have like a radio that you communicate with? Like, how does that planning phase work?
Yeah, so we storyboard. If it's the right kind of project, we'll storyboard it. A lot of the time, we'll create like a visual mood film as well. So we'll take other films that either we've done or that we like, put together, create a little reel for the feel of it, maybe the look of it, maybe the color grade. And then when it comes to individual shots and planning those shots, a hell of a lot of it is in my head or the filmmaker's head, because we've done so much of this that we know exactly how that shot's going to work. But then you're right, it's a case of getting on the radio, talking to the driver, and that's why we want to use drivers that we've used before. And often we're using, if it's McLaren, it's always pro drivers. If it's Aston, it's always pro drivers. And we will be like, we want to do this. We've got this. We wouldn't do it in mini cars. I don't think I've ever done it with mini cars, but we could almost drive through, like, say it was a joust move, where one car is going towards another and they're passing like that. We could almost like slowly drive through it and work out the exact point where the joust is going to happen. We want to meet by this point. Let's do the timing and just have a couple of practices until things, sit in the right moment, in the right space, and then just go for it. So there is planning, but it's usually based on storyboards and based on storyboards, move films, looking at what other people have done, looking at what we've done in the past, trying to improve on those things.
And because you've done it so much, like when you are you operating the camera and you're looking at the monitor and you get a shot, do you know, all right, I got it? Or do you know a little thing, something's off, like let's do it again? Like how many takes do you do to kind of get the shot that you need?
That's all dependent on time, how long we've got. Say we're on track and we're filming like, I don't know, Valkyrie AMR Pro or something like that. They might say to us, you've got 40 minutes of tracking. That's your window. You have to do everything you can in that time. And you want to do it as little as possible because obviously there's risk. And then the other thing is, if you don't get it on that corner, you either keep going around the track until you can come back to that same corner and do it again, or just keep trying it even if you're not in their exact position until it feels right, and then just go for it. But you're right, when you're operating the camera, sometimes you just know. You know instantly if you've nailed it. And that feeling of nailing the shot is just like ecstasy. And it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it feels great.
And do you let everybody know that you got the shot? Do you like yell out and celebrate, or you just kind of keep it to?
I don't celebrate at all. And the guys I work with, we don't really say. There might be a little something, but I kind of like the mystery of just shooting it all, getting home, and then wowing them with the edit, really. So definitely don't make a big deal out of it, or try not to.
Like kind of under promise and over deliver is kind of like the motto.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. You're only as good as your last job, and you always feel as a creator that you have to step it up every time. Just keep going and go. I mean, obviously, like I said, we do all sorts of different types of films, but if it is like a marketing film to market a new car, you just have to feel like you have to step it up over and over and over. So you're your own worst critic, or your best critic in that sense, and you just keep pushing yourself further and further. You just want to impress. You want to impress.
Are there any like favorite projects that you've worked on that you can talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some amazing ones. Like I said, I probably do like 50% of what I do is studio based now, and I absolutely love the studio. So anything that gets us creative in the studio and makes us think outside the box. So I love some of the Valhalla films we've done. We've done a couple of really cool ones in the studio. DBS 770 in the studio. McLaren Speedtail. Did a really cool shoot with that in the studio. Done Ferraris and Lotus. Done some really nice single light waving teaser type films with Lotus in the studio. So I absolutely love studio stuff. But in terms of location, I mean, I just got back from 7 weeks in Monaco shooting the DB12 launch for Aston, and that's 7 weeks of filming every day. But that's we are facilitating journalists for a lot of that. but we always make a hero film, so like a hero marketing film. So that's been quite a fun one. Yeah, so on location, we've my production company's been all over the world shooting, and it's really hard to pin down a specific shoot that is a favourite, because some of them are there's so many. I mean, even back in the Evo days, things that I wouldn't necessarily consider good now. The shoots were so much fun, and what you were doing was so unique that almost that makes up for the fact that the quality of the cameras at the time weren't quite there. But yeah, in recent history, we've done some amazing films for McLaren, done a couple of different films for McLaren with all their latest cars, 600 LTs, 765 LTs, and 720S, and Senna, Speedtail, the list goes on. And then Bentley, done some great shoots for them, was up in Scotland doing Flying Spur Speed not that long ago. Rolls-Royce, done some like amazing shoots for them in central London. And then Aston really has been the one where I've had the most, probably the coolest jobs. But also a brand that you don't even have over there, which is Skoda. I've done I did some ice driving with them this winter. They were trying to beat drift record, the world's longest drift on ice. So you get some amazing projects, and they're amazing because of the people, they're amazing because of the location, they're amazing because of the car. And then if the film comes together, and it looks good, then they're amazing because of the film. Done Lotus Emira, Lotus Elettra in the studio, done Hennessy, done shoots for Hennessy with their Venom GT, done shoots for Brabham with their BT62. Shot all the Gordon Murray cars since they started with T50. So done T50, T33, T50, Niki Lauda. Polestar, done all their cars for them at some point. Volvo, even done stuff for Volvo in Sweden recently. BMW, done quite a bit for BMW Classic as well for the Germans, and Mercedes. Honestly, mate, it's ridiculous. Try and work for everyone. That's my one piece of advice: is try and work for everyone.
Do you have a favorite out of like all of the cars? Like I know the McLaren F1 is kind of like seen as one of the favorites, but do you have a favorite yourself?
Now, do you mean a favorite car or a favorite car to shoot? Because they're two different things, I think.
If they're different, then yeah.
Somebody asked me this recently. They said, "Can you pick a road and pick the car on that road to shoot?" And I just really struggled to think of it. It sounds big-headed, but I've shot all the cars that were my dream cars in the 90s and 2000s. I've pretty much shot, but maybe not in the perfect scenario, obviously. I would love to do something like an F50, which I have shot before, but like an F50 in Switzerland, or I would still, like I said, XJ220 was my favorite car when I was a kid. Maybe something really cool with that. XJ220 in like Iceland or somewhere. But I tell you what, I also really like off-road stuff. I'm like a bit of a geek for pickups and off-road vehicles. So I would, and the really nice thing about shooting off-road is you get to like break the rules, because it feels like when you're shooting a car, there's only so many ways you can do it, because you can find to these rules of how you should shoot a car, which every automotive filmmaker kind of knows those rules. Whereas when you're doing off-roading, you kind of can break those rules, because you're not doing, there's no white lines to be crossing. There's no, you don't even have to stay in a straight line. You can be doing all sorts of weird stuff, driving through water and jumps and drifts and everything. So Yeah, there's. I'll have to think about what my dream car and shoot would be and get back to you.
So yeah, thanks so much, Sam, for giving us all this insight into your career, and it's been, you know, you've filmed everything, so it's going to be a nice little podcast. But is there any advice for other filmmakers that like want to get into filming cars that you can kind of give us as a last thought?
I said it earlier, but I think definitely the editorial. If there's any way you can get into editorial, it's just such a good way to start to learn. I know the whole world is TikTok mad and everyone's doing the same kind of thing at the moment. I think you've got to find your own style, you know, and if that means taking a style that isn't even car related, but bringing it to cars, I think that's always going to make you stand out. And I think the best automotive filmmakers have got their own style. I really see that now as time's gone on, because when I started, there was hardly any of us. There was like I said, there was probably 3 of us, and now everyone's an automotive filmmaker, it seems. So I think definitely find your own style. Don't just go with trends, and try and get into editorial however you can. Beg, borrow, and steal to get into editorial.
Well, thanks so much, Sam. It's been great, and I hope you have a great day, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Amazing. So nice to meet you, Rory. Great. Thanks, mate.